Hey, how's it going everybody? Welcome back to Aussie Fish Keeping. So in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at 7 top dwelling fish that you can get for your aquarium. So when you have an aquarium, particularly a larger sized aquarium, it's always good to add top dwellers in there, just to add a little bit of life and movement around that top section of your aquarium. So all 7 species on this list do spend a majority of their time at the top of your aquarium, although if they are feeding or exploring your tank, you may find that they do move throughout your aquarium. But yeah, like I said before, I've put together a list of 7 species which I think are the best top dwellers. So without any further ado, let's just jump straight into today's video. So as for the first fish on our list, we have a fish that I love to talk about on this channel. We have medaka. So medaka are a top dwelling fish, and most of the time you can distinguish a top dwelling fish from other fish just by their body shape. So generally, if a fish does spend a lot of its time at the top of your aquarium, you will notice that they have a really flat back with a pretty small dorsal fin. As well as this, you will find a lot of the time that these top dwelling fish have an upturned mouth, just because many of these top dwelling species are insectivores and they generally feed on insects on low-lying branches. So a lot of the time as well, these top dwelling fish generally live in fast flowing waters or flowing waters in general. So being able to stick to the surface of the water and having a pretty streamlined body shape obviously helps them stay to the top of the water without using too much energy. So in the case of a medaka, you will find that they have an upturned mouth and they do have a flat back with more of a curved stomach, so that does help them be a little bit more streamlined. So as for the diet for these guys, you do want to try and give them some sort of insectivore diet. So you can obviously feed them things like mosquito larvae or daphnia, but you can most of the time nowadays get bug-based diets, which I would highly recommend for the medaka. So as for medaka water parameters, you don't need to worry too much just because of how hardy these guys are. So they don't need a heater in their aquarium whatsoever, and they can live in a cold water setup. As for pH, you generally want to keep it around 7 to 8, and that's just going to help you keep your fish nice and healthy. And obviously this pH level is quite achievable, and you definitely don't need to be any master aquarium keeper to keep a relatively stable 7 to 8 pH. So one thing I would highly recommend if you are planning on keeping medaka or any top dwellers in general is definitely try and have a lid on the aquarium. So because they are so close to the top of your aquarium, they can quite easily jump out if they get spooked. So having a lid obviously completely eliminates that risk. But yeah, I definitely think medakas are a great top dwelling fish that you can get for your aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super unusual looking fish. We have halfbeaks. So halfbeaks are a live bearing fish and they actually resemble a garfish. So these guys also have a super streamlined shaped body, which obviously helps them stay around that top of your aquarium. And I believe these guys do come from pretty fast flowing waters, so having the needle shaped body is super beneficial for them to be able to swim. So if you do keep these guys, I would highly recommend keeping them with a lid, just because these guys will most definitely jump out if you don't have a lid. So these guys are quite a fickle little fish and they can be spooked quite easily. So obviously if you don't have a lid, it's going to end quite badly. So even though these guys are live bearers, I do believe they are much more difficult to breed than your average platies or guppies. Although in saying that, I don't think these guys are prone to eating their young. So before you do get these guys, you do want to be doing a little bit of research on them, just because most of these half-beak fish do better in slightly brackish conditions. Although in saying that, they can tolerate the freshwater conditions, but I would just highly recommend doing a little bit of research just to make sure you are getting a fully freshwater half-beak. And as for water parameters, you do want to keep them in a pH of around 6.5 to 7, and with a temperature of around 24 to 28 degrees Celsius. So an ideal food for these guys would be something like pinhead crickets or fruit flies, but obviously you can feed them things like brine shrimp and daphnia in the aquarium hobby. But yeah, I definitely think that halfbeaks are another super cool, unusual, top dwelling fish that you can get for your aquarium. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have another super unusual fish. We have the African butterfly fish. So from a bird's eye view, these guys do, funnily enough, look a lot like a butterfly. So they have super nice large fins which look almost like wings when they are in your aquarium. And as well as that, they do have modified thread fins below them. So these guys do get a lot larger than the other two species, and they can be quite aggressive. So you definitely do not want to be keeping them with anything like neon tetras or other small tetras or asporas, just because they make the perfect meal for these guys and they will definitely eat them all on you. So some good tank mates for these guys include bottom dwelling fish such as bristlenose and Corydoras catfish, or any other much larger fish like gouramis, although you definitely don't want any aggressive fish that is actually going to be nipping at their long thread fins, because they are quite spookish and they can jump out very easily if they are threatened like that. So as for diet, it's generally recommended that you do try and feed these guys crickets or some sort of insect like that. But you can also train them to be on a pellet diet, which you can quite easily get. So as for temperature, you want to try and keep them at around 25 to 28 degrees Celsius. And as for your pH, somewhere around 6.5 to 7 should be perfectly fine for these guys. So if you are looking for a super freaky and cool top-dwelling fish, I would highly recommend the African butterfly fish. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super cool, colorful fish. We have the golden panchax. So panchax are a species of killifish, and most of the time these panchax are actually top-dwelling. So the golden panchax, I believe, is also referred to as the golden wonder killifish. And these guys do actually get quite large for a killifish, and they actually can max out around 10 centimeters in length. So being a top dweller, they do actually have an upturned mouth, and this mouth is actually super large. So once again, you don't want to keep them with any small tetras or asporas, and generally trying to keep them with some sort of bottom dweller is the best combination. But in saying that, these guys aren't really that aggressive, so as long as there's nothing in their tank that's too small to fit in their mouth, they should be fine with it. So these guys are a tropical fish, and they do need a heater in their aquarium set to anywhere between 22 and 26 degrees Celsius. And you want a pH of around 6.8 to 7.5. So I find with these guys, and with a lot of top dwellers in general, they do super well with some sort of floating plant in there. But you don't want the floating plant to completely overtake the tank, just because you do want some bare spots around the surface of your aquarium that your top dwellers can access. But things like frogbit and redroot floaters and large roots floating plants like that generally do make a great plant for these guys. But yeah, I definitely think that golden panchax are a super cool and colorful top dwelling fish that you can get for your fish tank. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super cool fish, one that I've always wanted to get but I never have. We have hatchet fish. So hatchet fish have a super weird body shape, and these guys are actually distantly related to tetras. So the body shape of these guys isn't just some super weird coincidence, and it does actually play a super vital role in their survival. So obviously they have that super thin but round body, and along with that they have two pretty broad fins quite high up on their body. So these fins and this body shape allow for the fish to quite easily propel themselves out of the water to catch small aerial insects, and it actually allows for them to do this with as little effort as possible. So with that being said, obviously they do like an insectivore based diet, so if you can feed them things like pinhead crickets or fruit flies, that would be great, but also you can feed them some sort of bug based aquarium food. So one thing with these guys is you do most of the time want to try and keep them with aquarium plants, just because they are a very small fish and they can be preyed upon quite easily in the wild. So they do feel a lot safer with some sort of aquarium plants, or even having some sort of plant like pothos just with its roots in the water. So as for water parameters, the temperature you want to keep these guys at is around 24 to 28 degrees Celsius. And you do want a pH of around 6 to 6.8. So a cool thing about these guys, because they can tolerate a pH of around 6 to 6.8, they do make a great addition to a blackwater setup. So if you are also looking for a blackwater fish, I would highly recommend the hatchet fish as well. But as for a super cool little top dwelling fish, I would definitely recommend the hatchet fish. Moving on to the next fish on our list, we have a super cool Australian native fish. We have archerfish. So archerfish are probably most popular for the way they actually get their food. So these guys actually have a super cool adaptation of spitting out water at insects on low-lying branches, which is obviously why they get the name archerfish. So it is quite hard to replicate this feeding behavior in your aquarium, but if you do have some sort of tweezers or tongs, you can get a cricket and just hold it a couple of centimeters above the water, and once the archerfish spits at it, you drop it in and they feed that way. There is a couple of other ways to simulate their natural feeding behavior, but I'd say that is the easiest. And obviously, in saying that, they do prefer a insectivore diet, so I would highly recommend trying to feed them things like crickets. You could also probably try and feed them other insects like black soldier fly larvae. So a lot of the time the archerfish are collected from the wild, and they are actually collected from brackish environments. So they do a lot better with a little bit of salt in their water, and it's not hard to make a brackish water setup, but you do need to do a little bit of research before you do try and set one up. But because they like a little bit of a saltier environment, you do want to try and keep the pH of around 7.5 to 8 and the temperature to around 24 to 26 degrees Celsius. But yeah, I definitely think that archerfish are another super great top-dwelling fish that you can get for your aquarium. Moving on to the final fish on our list, we have a super common beginner fish. We have Danios. So Danios are relatively top-dwelling, although they do actually move around your aquarium quite a bit. But I would say a majority of their time is spent around that top portion of your water. So Danios are super hardy fish, and they don't really mind about water parameters at all. So you can keep them in a heated or unheated aquarium. As for pH, they don't really mind whatsoever. As long as it's between 6.5 to 7, you should find that your Danios live perfectly healthy. As well as this, their diet is really quite varied as well, but I would try and recommend feeding them a super high protein and nutrient rich flake food or pelleted diet. And along with that, I would also feed them some sort of frozen or live food. But yeah, I definitely think that Danios are another great top-dwelling fish that you can get for your aquarium. But with that being said, that is going to bring us to the end of today's video. So I hope you all enjoyed, and I hope I helped you guys find a brand new top-dwelling fish. If you haven't already and you did enjoy today's video, please make sure to go down and subscribe. And while you're down there, comment your thoughts on the video. But yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you all so much for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you all in that next video.